Good morning, everybody. You know, I've figured out there's a couple things today that'll make you have religion or find it. One is landing aboard an aircraft carrier at night when it's moving around. And the other thing is hoping that this thing will work throughout the rest of the presentation. See, I've got religion. I'm praying right now harder than I ever have. Well, it sure is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you all today, and I'm going to share with you a few stories that are personal to me, and share with you what's allowed myself and other colleagues of mine to survive in arguably one of the most dangerous environments in the world. The interesting thing about that is that that environment on an aircraft carrier is so very similar to drilling operations. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but the important thing about incident-free operations and how to get there, or get to the area of high reliability operations, is it's a deliberate, intentional act. It doesn't deal with hope. It doesn't deal with good intentions. It's a deliberate, intentional act in order to have zero incident operations, to have a predictable outcome each and every single time. And with that, this is my background actually in both of these. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, because if 4.5 years ago somebody would have told me that I'd be flying into Copenhagen and taking a beautiful train ride in order to share a morning with you all, I'd have thought they were absolutely out of their mind. But an interesting thing happened to me going through Houston about that time. Was a gentleman by the name of Gordon Schritter called me up, and he was a deep water drilling engineer for BHP Billiton. And they're the world's largest mining operator as far as I know, but they also have a significant drilling operation as well, and at this time it was in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And I knew Gordon just in passing, and he knew that my background had been as a geologist and for a couple of years until 1986, when oil went to about $6 a barrel. And then I found myself in the Navy. Got yelled at by a Marine for 3 months, and they sent me to flight school. But he asked me an interesting question. He said, is there anything that you all did in the Navy flying off of aircraft carriers so that you could have a predictable outcome for everything, and without hurting people or breaking things? And I said, well, yeah, we do. And the curriculum is called Top Gun. And there's another curriculum called an air wing training program, and I'll explain aircraft carriers to you here in a little bit. But long story short, he was looking at a behavioral science white paper that was written by a PhD in behavioral science, and in short order, it basically said this. It said that the drilling industry would be well served if they looked at the best practices from space, commercial aviation, and aircraft carrier operations. The second thing it said was that the messenger that could speak with credibility to that would be astronauts and fighter pilots. So Gordon was looking at a white paper, and he got to thinking, who do I know that's a fighter pilot? And I got a phone call, and he said, I'm spending $1.2 million a day on 2 rigs, drilling in 8,000 feet of water, and we seem to be doing things twice an awful lot. Do you think we could modify the syllabus you're talking about and apply it to drilling rigs? So that's how I ended up being here and flying into Copenhagen about 4.5 years later. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But the interesting thing, here's how an aircraft carrier operates. It's a great, big, amazing piece of equipment. It has catapults on it. It has arresting gear to catch the airplanes when they come in and land. The technology is amazing. However, what you have is essentially you have 5,000 people that are operating this piece of equipment. 5,000. An aircraft carrier will deploy for a 6-month period of time, powered by nuclear propulsion, has all sorts, it's a small city, if you will. Half of those 5,000 people, 2,500 of them belong to the aircraft carrier itself. The other 2,500 comprise an air wing. An air wing is roughly 89 to 100 airplanes, 8 to 10 squadrons. Each squadron has somewhere between 200 to 450 people in it, and each one has about $500 million of airplanes assigned to each squadron. Now, here's the interesting thing. From an aircraft carrier when it deploys to when it deploys for 6 months, comes back and deploys again, there's about a 12 to 18-month period of time in there. During that period of time, there's a 70% turnover of personnel from when it went on one deployment to when it goes on to another one. So the training effort that you have is continuous and ongoing, and you have to train up that many people in 12 to 18 months. And it's an extraordinary thing to do. But for somebody who's done a career on aircraft carriers, the training goes on and on and on. But you have to operate with the limited resources you have to operate at a level to where when the average age is around 21 years old, with a 70% turnover, and it's not just in your frontline troops, it's everybody, the management, the captain of the ship, the admiral of the battle group. It's a Herculean feat in order to make that thing happen. But here's the thing, when you look at that environment and you look at a drilling rig, they're so similar. Take the technology, for example. Well, the first thing I noticed when I went from a drilling rig and then landed on an aircraft carrier and got out and looked around was it smells the same. You know the smell when you're on a drilling rig? A little bit of diesel in the air, that salty air, that type of thing. That's exactly what you have on an aircraft carrier. And then you look around and you see the arresting gear cables on it. Well, they look exactly like the drilling line that's on the drawworks or on that's wrapped around the motion compensators that you have out there. The interesting thing too is like the Schlumberger downhole tools that, where's Duncan at, that you're familiar with, the accelerometers and magnetometers you have down near the bit for these complex directional wells that you all drill. Those are the exact same accelerometers and magnetometers that are in our missiles on our airplanes. And so the technology is the same. The only difference is one's drilling a hole in the ground and another one's throwing airplanes off the front end of the ship. But the really interesting part, and the thing that I enjoyed more than anything else, was the people. The demographic, the diversity that you have on an aircraft carrier and a drilling rig are all the same. You have people from very challenged educational opportunities that may not have a high school degree or a 6th grade education, but in the same team you have people with advanced degrees of PhDs and beyond. And a lot of times it's a fine line between who the real brain trust is in that whole thing. Because my life's been saved more by the 6th grade education than the PhD, but so the difference between an aircraft carrier and a drilling rig is really not much, other than the objective you have for that piece of hardware. At the end of the day, you have amazing technology and you have a human workforce that integrates with that technology. And how well they operate together is really the key to success. Most importantly, between the technology and the human element, which one is most prone to failure? Anyone? Between technology and the human, which one is going to fail the most? The human, exactly. Absolutely. So how do you manage that? Well, that's what I'm going to share with you in a little bit, after I get a little more religion here. I'm going to go over my biography just in short order, but I want you, when you look at it, I want to share something with you. My core competency, the things that I'm really good at, is horseshoeing. I'm a farrier. I put shoes on horses' feet. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at being a ranch hand. I'm good at digging ditches. I'm a good small engine mechanic. The things I've had the opportunity to do, the leadership skills that I've been blessed with, are all because I've been trained to do so. I'm a horseshoer, for crying out loud. Okay? So, with that being said, I've had the privilege of flying F-14s, F-18s, and F-16 aircraft. I've got over 4,200 hours, a bunch of carrier landings, half of them are at night. And like I said, that really gives you religion coming aboard a ship at night. Have a few accolades for being put into service. Not that I personally wanted to, but it's just what you have to do sometimes. I'm a geologist by degree. In 84 to 86, I worked in the oil industry in the Gulf of Mexico and on the only well that's drilled up in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up in Alaska. Once again, it was one of those things where I was in the Gulf of Mexico in the summer and Alaska in the winter. Somehow that I should have got that the other way around. Done a few startup companies. I designed and built a natural gas gathering system while I was on active duty in the Navy. When I was living in Fallon, Nevada, and built a gathering system in Oklahoma, something else I'll probably never do in my life. The other part is I drilled some wells in Colorado. A couple of us put some nickels together and drilled for some shallow coal bed methane. I'm also a pilot for FedEx. The interesting thing about, is anybody not familiar with FedEx, Federal Express? That's an interesting operation they have there. Because when you look at humans operating with machines, pilots operating with airplanes, FedEx has to manage over 4,000 pilots every night that are functionally flying drunk between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, not that we're really boozing it up or anything, but your human performance degradation from being a day creature to a night creature, by the third night, everybody in that cockpit is functionally degraded 50%. And it's just the human factors part of it. As a result, FedEx you'd spend 3 days in how to sleep every year at FedEx, but it's part of understanding and managing that risk. So the point I'm making with this slide is not that I'm a fighter pilot and the world revolves around me. The whole point is I'm a horseshoer and I had the lucky privilege of being trained to do this. The point being is that white paper that Gordon Schritter was reading when he gave a phone call was very profound. Best practices from some industries can be applied to other ones and have remarkable results. And the part of all this is, how do you do it? First off, it has to be incredibly simple. There has to be a buy-in by everybody that operates that way, whether they realize it or not. And typically that buy-in comes in the form of time. But this right here is how we do it on an aircraft carrier for everything. Because an aircraft carrier, when we get put into service to go and do something, we're not very good for 3 days. But after 3 days, we're the best in the world at what we do. And it's because we do this. We start out with everything we do is planned. No matter how small or how big, it's planned. And it starts with what that objective is. It can be something as simple as I land my jet and now I've got to get off of the flight deck and hide somewhere because that flight deck scares me to death. That's not my world. Landing my plane on it, taking off from it, taxiing around on it, that's my world. But physically walking around a flight deck is absolutely the scariest thing in the world, next to being around the rotary on a drill floor. Because there's things beyond your control. But you have to plan everything. It starts with an objective, you have a plan, then you have to brief that plan, the critical communication node. From that, you execute. There's 3 things you have to have in the world of high reliability operations during the execution phase, and they're all planned. You have to have cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. If there's anything that you take away from these few minutes I get to share with you, it's that. Cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. More on that here in a second, and a good example. Then you have this part here, the after-action review, or the debrief. This is the change mechanism. This is what differentiates high-reliability operations from anything else. When you're done with the execution, it's just like you're not done with the job until the tools are cleaned up. You have to debrief. What was the objective? What worked? What didn't? What are we going to do different next time? Then you take it and incorporate those lessons learned back into your plan. The thing that you do is you incorporate as well all the tools that time, money has been spent in right now, because this simple cycle of life here is resident in virtually every safety management system I've ever looked at. And of course you all are looking at that and going, that's brilliant, Brew. What third grade teacher taught you that? But if y'all would, pull out a pen real quick. You've got some paper there inside your little binder, and we're going to do an experiment. And if you'd indulge me just a little bit, let's see if this part of the world is like every other. I'm going to give you all about 45 seconds to write down the following for me. Because this is quite simple. You have a plan, you brief the plan, you execute, you debrief. What's so impressive about that? Nothing. That's why it works. It's simple. But the devil's always in the details. So I'm going to give you 45 seconds, and I want everybody to write down what the components of a plan are. Not what the definition of a plan is, but what are the components of a plan. Ready, go. All right, rip those pages off and hand them to me. What do you think the odds are that everybody wrote down the same thing as far as what a plan is? No? Do you think? Well, let's take a look here. Pilot, engine, wings, cockpit. Yep, y'all are right. They're not the same. So where do you think I'm going with that point? If it sounds obvious that you have to plan everything, you brief those plans, you execute, and you debrief, but we're not all in agreement on what a plan is, what's the point? What are the consequences of that? Because here's basically what we see when we go out and look at drilling operations, not from within the industry, but from outside the industry in either space, commercial aviation, or aircraft carrier operations. We see a lot of this, a lot of assumptions, that when somebody says, well, sure, we operate off of a plan, or do we? Because if we're not all like-minded in what a plan is, then how can we be sure that my definition of a plan is the same as your definition of a plan? And if at the end of the day, our roustabouts and our roughnecks and our drillers, if they're not like-minded in what a plan is, then how certain can we be that those actions are taking place, or that we really even do have a plan? The Navy learned a big lesson. The United States Navy learned a big lesson in this in the early 1980s from a catastrophe of a mission. And what came out of that was that the entire Naval Air Force had to standardize what a plan really is, because that was what contributed to the catastrophe. People thought that they were operating off of plans, but my definition of a plan was different than your definition, was different than your definition. So at the end of the day, we were operating off of good intentions, but certainly not plans. The other thing we see is in the private sector, there's not much of a debrief culture. And why is that important? Well, it's because I don't have to have an experience in order to benefit from somebody else's experience. It accelerates learning. The single critical factor on training 5,000 people in 12 months. So if we have these, well, here's the basic answer to what a plan is. Whether you're putting a person on the moon, whether you're conducting combat operations, or whether you're on a commercial airliner, here's the basic 5 components of a plan. What's the objective? Clear, measurable, attainable. What are my resources? Tools, technology, people, information, time. Those are all resources that are used or they're limiting factors of some sort. And then there's the steps. Who does what, when, where, and why. It's only at this point that we can properly risk assess for any particular circumstance. And then with that, you develop contingencies. And then the last thing, because especially in deep water operations where you're spending about over $11 a second, you don't have, everything has to be a deliberate act, including when are we going to debrief. And the sooner and the more often you debrief, the better it is. Because what are the consequences if we don't standardize planning? Because keep in mind, this whole way of operating, it's simplicity with a dash of discipline and a little bit of standardization is how it works, and how it works quite well. And if we're not standardized on what the definition of a plan is, what's that going to do for our time to plan when you get a bunch of people together to plan something? Is it going to be shorter or longer? Anyone? It's going to take longer. A good example of that is strike planning. We start out, there's a month-long training program for these 250 pilots in an air wing. They come in and we do it for a month. You plan, you brief, you execute, you debrief, and you do it over and over again for a month. For 30 people going together to plan without standardizing that process, we'll give them 12 hours to plan a 15-minute strike evolution. And they use every bit of the 12 hours. A month later, 30 people are accomplishing the same objective simply through using these 5 steps, and it takes them 15 minutes. Do the man-hour count on that. But the thing that's important is that the plans are more complete, the risk assessment is more complete, and you end up with a better product in a shorter period of time, and because everybody is standardized. And this works incredibly well on aircraft carriers. But the other consequence is this, is that are people, if you don't, or if an industry does not have everybody in the chain of command operating this way, are we really operating on just good intentions, or are they deliberate acts? And is there a comprehensive risk assessment that's taken place embedded in those plans? And most importantly, are we going to have a predictable outcome every time for everything? Or do you have this? That's like a bad car wreck. You just want to see it again, don't you? You all are sick. My people. What was the objective? What was the objective? Sir, what do you think his objective was? Oh, well, let's not break it down yet, but let's look at what his fundamental objective was. Brand the horse, absolutely. Did he accomplish the objective? Good to go. Wait, right on. Do you think that was his predictable outcome he was looking for? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But then there's also this one. What was the objective? Turn the truck over. Did we accomplish the objective? Good job. But was that the intention behind it? These types of operations we just saw, those were activities based on good intentions alone. And in a high reliability operation, everything has to be deliberate. And if the objective isn't stated properly to begin with, which is a leadership function, then you end up with those types of plans that come out of it, or a lack of plans. So with them, they're going, well, why do we need to plan to turn the truck over? Why do I need to plan to brand a horse? Because the follow-on actions, if they're not through a structured process, you're going to end up with those kinds of results. Now we get to the part of after a plan is put together, we're all standardized, and it's that critical briefing node that we have to, that critical communication piece in which we have to not only talk about the plan, but we have to confirm understanding of the plan. And there's a big difference in that. And it incorporates a multitude of communication skills, and it's predictable what retention rates are going to be from just speaking to somebody to having them interact with you while you're in the process of briefing. And once again, it's a trained attribute. I used to be petrified to speak in public. Absolutely would lock up. But over a period of time and getting trained at it on the proper way to do it, or a way to do it, whether it's proper or not, I have a limited vocabulary, so that stifles me a bit. And then cultural differences, which is the beauty of this industry. It's so diverse, but you have to take into account these types of issues.
Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
You know, that's funny, but it's so true. And I'm not picking on Germans or anything, but when you fly around to various parts of the world, and Bo, you can back me up on this, some of the controllers that you end up talking to, you end up looking at your buddy in the cockpit and looking around going, I think I know what they meant to say, but I have no idea what it is they just said. So the fundamental key of simplicity with a dose of discipline and a dash of standardization is based on this: what the components of a plan are, and making sure that everybody operates in that fashion. Now, the various safety management systems that you all have drafted, invested in, improved on, and so forth, they all include this stuff. This isn't anything new for you. It's just a matter of compliance and the understanding at the tip of the spear of your folks on operating in that level. Because the briefing format you go through is the same. The debrief format is the same as that. So it's just one piece of, it's a very important piece in your toolbox that your folks can put in their back pocket and apply on a daily basis. The results of it are pretty dramatic. In 90 to 120 days, when your folks operate this level, you can take your safety numbers and virtually cut them in half, whatever they are. If you have a rig that's not so good, great. If you have the best in the world, even better, because they'll get cut in half in that length of time. Simplicity, dose of standardization, and a dash of discipline. It also equates to a bunch of savings there. This happened to 81 million. That came on 2 rigs over a 1-year period of time. An eye chart up here for you. Essentially, your safety metrics drop down, and we've got some for North Sea rigs a new build rig that came out, as well as a pride of the fleet rig for one contractor. You know, it had reached a plateau in performance and safety, but when they got to the disciplined approach of standardizing planning, standardizing the briefing process, and most importantly, incorporating a debrief culture on the rig, the results were remarkable. And I'm going further on getting more religion here as we speak. So here's basically what it requires. You need that simplicity with that dash of discipline, a dose of standardization, and you need a culture of cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. The human component is going to fail. And it was a tough reality check for me, because when you go in and start to fly fighters, Bo's no exception to that, you have to be rather self-confident when you step into that world. But the other realization that you have is that you're also the most vulnerable component of that man-machine interface. And you have to have cross-checks. Those are checklist items, your permit to work, your lockout, tagout protocols, and so forth. You have to have mutual support. One is none, two is one. For me, it was very important, and that's what Check 6 stands for. It's a clock code where my wingman flies a mile abeam me. My obligation and responsibility is to check his 6 o'clock, and he or she will in turn check my 6 o'clock. For me, it was very personal, primarily because I had the fortune or misfortune, if you will, of being shot at 17 times by surface-to-air missiles. And of those 17, how many times do you think I was the first person that saw the missile come up? 0. It was my wingman, it was my roommate, it was my backseater. I was too busy at the mission at hand. And so you have to have that in a high reliability operation, because it's not a matter of if the human's going to fail, they're going to fail. So you have to have this culture. The other one is oversight. Somebody with a broader perspective that can check your 6 and everybody else's, and so forth. Let me wrap this up for you, because I've taken a lot of your time already. Incident-free operations. It's a reality. It can be done. It's a training endeavor that is a wonderful thing to be a part of, because I was talking to a number of folks, and my feeling is, because of organizations like this that are truly committed to this type of endeavor, is that the oil industry is going to see a level of change and improvement in their drilling operations that's going to happen in the next 24 to 36 months. That's going to rival the changes that have occurred over the last 30 years. And it's because it's a mandate. It can be done, it will be done, simply because of responsible organizations like this that realize that the search for energy is not worth a loss of life when it's preventable. And the other part of that is a subsea discharge of hydrocarbons in ultra-deep water would be an environmental catastrophe that would make the Exxon Valdez look like a pimple. And it's really a privilege and an honor to be in the company of people that, one, realize that, and two, are going to make that happen. And it's a privilege and honor to share with you some experience that myself, Bo, and others have learned through tragic events that led to responsible and truly professional endeavors. And this is what it takes. A little bit of discipline, some standardization, and operating off a plan-based execution model of planning, briefing, execution, and debrief with cross-checks, mutual support, and oversight. And it's going to be an ongoing training program. The key, obviously, is leadership buy-in, understanding this model, and then making it a mandate for how operations are going to take place. Because space, commercial aviation, and carrier operations have demonstrated that it's possible. And it's the same type of people integrating with the same amazing types of technology, and it's certainly possible. Folks, thank you all very much. It's a real privilege and an honor.